It is great to be joined by Danielle Alvari. She does incredible work here at the network, and I know that she's hosting a new show/podcast called Bet the W, which I know that that's going to be up on YouTube within the next few days. And Danielle, congratulations on that, and always great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm really excited for WNBA season, obviously tipping off on Friday. So we'll have a season preview go up probably Wednesday this week on YouTube while we're still getting the kinks worked out of getting it into the podcast realm, which it will be eventually wherever you get your podcasts. And then also, of course, we'll have a preview of the Friday games and going into the weekend before that kicks off as well.
And you are currently wearing, if you're watching on VSiN.com, YouTube TV, what have you, a fan favorite out here in lovely Las Vegas, Kelsey Plum, smoking a cigar on your shirt, which I absolutely love that. And I know that
championship behavior.
Yes, absolutely it is. And for the Las Vegas Aces, the rich got richer during the offseason, and they are at the top of the odds board. And I think what a lot of people are going to find is that this is a pretty top-heavy league right now with the Vegas Aces and the New York Liberty based on where you find these odds, whether it be BetMGM, whether it be DraftKings, what have you. Both of these teams are right around about plus 120, plus 130 or so, and then you've pretty much got everyone else north of 10 to 1. How do you evaluate this? Because I do think that Candace Parker is going to be able to play a big role with the Aces, and as we know, Sabrina Ionescu and what the New York Liberty have built over the last few years, that is big, but is there anyone outside those top two that could be able to wreck the apple cart?
That is the question here. I'm also marveling. I don't think I've had my name on a graphic yet. This is the Danielle Alvari WNBA Power Rankings. How exciting. There's a couple teams that I thought were a little bit longer shots than they should have been, and you can understand why. The Connecticut Sun, you can see fourth in my power rankings, but 40 to 1 in the odds in a lot of spots. And you see that they lost an MVP in Jonquel Jones. She went to the New York Liberty, and they also lost their head coach, Kurt Miller, who's done an incredible job of making the most out of whatever talent he has. He left for the LA Sparks head coaching job. But nevertheless, the Sun retained a lot of the same talent outside of Jonquel Jones, who they've also played without, mind you, because she missed a whole season with injury, not last year, but about 2 years ago at this point. So this team has probably the most chemistry outside of the other team I'm looking at that's more of a long shot. And by long shot, we just mean not the Aces or the Liberty. I've actually heard the Mystics, which is the other team I'm looking at, described as a sleeper team, but they're the third shortest in the odds at 13 to 1. So not exactly a sleeper, especially because people have started to pick up on it, and those odds have started to shift. That's the thing with the WNBA. Obviously, there's big line moves once people get the odds out. But I still like the Mystics at this price here, 13 to 1. I think that they have the core to be able to do this. They have won a championship before back in 2019. Elena Deladon was dealing with a back injury after that for a long time, to the point that last year she wouldn't travel to games that much, or she would skip back-to-backs or games that were close together, and actually only played 25 of the 36-game season last year. This year, we're getting a bump up to 40 games, and she said that she's never felt stronger. She feels as good as she did in that MVP season that she's had. So she's won MVP before. They've won a title before. This is a Mystics team that should definitely be in the conversation with the Aces and the Liberty, and yet you're seeing them as much longer odds. So I like the Mystics the best here, but the Connecticut Sun are also intriguing, sitting at 40 to 1.
Absolutely, and we did notice that during the WNBA playoffs, things were a little bit nip and tuck in a lot of those series. The Aces, they were able to get the job done in the end, but how much do you think that both of these teams, the top two out there in the Liberty and the Aces, might be just a little bit overpriced, and perhaps there is going to be a little bit more parity than what the odds are leading on?
Yeah, it's a good point. Obviously, a really short price here. Last year, you didn't get a really great price on the Aces once things tipped off because they just mowed down the competition. You could see something similar here again, where the Aces and the Liberty come out and they're just absolutely dominant from the get, and you're not going to get a better price on these numbers. Is unfortunately the case. It's very top heavy in the WNBA this year. It's been the case in years past as well, but especially now we have these two super teams. Are they overpriced is a different question. There's even a prop out there that you can bet, will the Liberty or the Aces win the title at minus 650, which is what, 87% probability of, or implied probability of them winning, which is crazy high. But it does seem like, because we have these two super teams, both with two MVPs on them, if one of these teams starts to stray, you have the other one waiting in the wings, ready to grab that title. So it does feel like it's going to be, I'll take a page out of the Giannis playbook here, but say that it's a failure if one of these two teams does not win the title with how stacked they are with their rosters.
Yep, I do think that these are two very stacked teams, but at the same time, you mentioned it, there are some very competitive other teams out there as well. And just in terms of evaluating the WNBA, because we're going to be getting going here relatively quick, how do you take a look at just betting game to game the first few weeks of the season? Because there were a lot of moves made in the offseason. As we know, Candace Parker going to the Aces, one of the biggest of them, but there have been some coaching moves that have been made. There's obviously a whole crop of players that come in via the NBA draft. Aaliyah Boston, what she's going to do, that is something of fascination as well. How do you go about betting the first few games of the season? Do you hold tight a little bit more, or is this the time that you can find some of the biggest edges?
Yes, definitely a situation where you want to see what's going to be what, because outside of those top 3 teams and really that bottom team with the Indiana Fever, the middle is very up in the air, which is good for some teams as far as win totals are concerned, because on any given night, any of these middle teams could beat each other. They're not as dominant as those top teams or as low as, say, the Indiana Fever, who I think maybe people are a little too low on, actually. But game to game, I think you have to see how this shakes out and what these teams look like under new coaches, missing MVPs, etc. A lot of these teams were gutted. The Chicago Sky are another example. Courtney Vandersloot left. Candace Parker left. Now Kalia Copper steps up. She was the leading scorer on this team and finals MVP the year that they won. So she's going to be stepping into a bigger role. How is that going to look with this Sky team that was otherwise gutted in a lot of ways? So there's a lot of these teams that have to shake out, see what they're going to do. What I will say is I think that the obvious thing is the Aces and the Liberty are going to have these incredible offenses. You have to bet the overs, but something to keep in mind is a lot of the Aces games, the Aces ended up, I think, like split evenly down the middle on when they went over and when they went under last year. And that was because the totals were so crazy high. So what I will say is be wary of these opening totals on these Aces and Liberty game where we're expecting a crazy amount of offense, rightfully so. The totals might be overinflated because we started to see that last year where you couldn't bet overs on Aces games, but you didn't want to bet an under either. So that's something I would take note of as we head early into the season. It's a tempting bet, but just be cautious.
I think that that's such a good point that you make, as Danielle Alvari, who does great work here at VSiN, is joining me on the Greg Peterson Experience, because I was noticing that the Aces game, it felt like their totals were like north of 10 points higher than any other team. So it's like, yeah, they're putting up more points than any other team, but now you need 10 more points to be able to go over as well. So that is always a little bit of a sticky situation, and certainly I know that you're going to be doing a great job on a game-to-game perspective when it comes to the WNBA. And are there any futures bets that you did make, whether it be on the futures board itself, or maybe there are some player awards, which obviously I know that in the WNBA, it's not quite what it is in the NBA in terms of offerings, but anything that you personally fired in on?
Mystics 14-1 to win the title. I looked at Elena Delle Donne to win MVP. She was at plus 750. It didn't sound exciting enough for me. Not that I think you'll get a better price on her, so you could grab that one as well. A little bit longer on the MVP board would be interesting. Brittany Griner making her return to the Phoenix Mercury. We're used to the MVP being the best player on the best team, and the Mercury are certainly not going to be the best team. But I think that there's this narrative behind the Brittany Griner. There's no comeback player of the year in the WNBA. It's the MVP or rookie of the year. So Brittany Griner comes out and is the best player on her team, as she very well might be. At least looks that way in preseason, and you're getting her at 16-1. I think that's a way better price. But otherwise, maybe pair it up with something like a Brianna Stewart or an Asia Wilson, who are the short shots in that MVP market.
I do think that that is such a good point that you bring up, too. The fact that Brittany Griner is, I mean, if you ever wanted a comeback player of the year in any sport, because I remember when we were looking at Geno Smith last year, it's like, what is he really coming back from? Is he coming back from just being someone that was warming the bench and filling up water bottles and things like that?
Yeah.
That's certainly a comeback story. No question about it.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.